Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Um, I know you are going to say it, but let me put in my own apology to our viewers, our listeners, for the um, um, technical hitch that we had last week. It's a pity. There were several critical issues lined up, and I just wanted them to know that I'm just as disappointed as they obviously were. And we hope that it's not Santa fiddling with some antenna while he's trying to bring in the goods.
Yes, absolutely correct. And just to let our viewers know that we are working on that, we will improve. We've made some changes, and over the next few weeks, we will continue to make changes just to stabilize things a little bit and make things better as we improve the service that we are offering to you. So I do echo that point of apology, and thank you for doing that, sir. Really, really do appreciate that, sir. I want to start this week in Africa. I know there were some questions from last week that we were going to address. I will bring those back as we go along in the broadcast today. But I want us to start from Africa as we look at some quite significant developments in Africa. And I will start from the news that we are having French troops exit Mali after 9 years. French troops will be exiting Mali. What is your take on that exit? Is this another Western country being humiliated out of a country that they have occupied for so long? What's your take, sir?
Thank you for that. I'll put it kind of differently. Um, yes, they've been there for 9 years. Doing what? They will say, and that's the French, they will say that they were trying to provide stability and protect Mali from the activities of the jihadists and the insurgents. Um, well, did they succeed in doing that? The answer is obvious. No, they didn't. Because part of what even the ordinary Malians on the streets were protesting about was that the presence of the French troops have not made any difference to the instability, insecurity, and what have you in their country. Now, don't tell me, don't tell me that the French, with all their satellite capabilities, drone capabilities, uh, uh, Air Force capabilities, Special Forces capabilities, which they managed to deploy in Libya, could not have driven the jihadists completely out of the Sahelian area. Yes, the jihadists were on the point of taking the capital of Mali, Bamako, when the French came in. And what did the French forces do? They drove them into the Sahara Desert and stopped. I said they drove them into the Sahara Desert. They did not decimate them. It was more like, okay, you've crossed a red line, you pull back and then you stay where you are. And from time to time, they make this foray and threaten the capital, threaten several cities. It was almost like there was an understanding between the jihadists and the French troops as to what was permissible and what was not permissible. And obviously, the insecurity to the lives of the Malians was permissible. And it then makes you wonder, really, what were they doing there? I think on this program, I have said before, the French have one of the largest gold reserves in their central bank, but they do not have any gold mines. Mali has no gold reserves, and yet they have one of the largest gold mines in the world. And so I'm putting it to you that part of why the French forces were there was probably to protect the gold mining activities of the French mining companies. So, but this now makes this move dangerous to the Mali people and the Mali government. Because if I know the activities of the French government, they are going through nods, winks, and what have you, encourage the jihadists to actually overthrow the Malian government, or they will encourage a section of the Malian forces to overthrow this present government so they could be invited back in. But they are not going to let go of that gold mine.
So we continue to see what appears to be almost a race, not just for African resources by Western and even Middle Eastern countries, but also we're starting to see another trend where countries are starting to build military bases around Africa more and more. And of recent, there was the news that China was planning to do something around Equatorial Guinea, and they were planning to build a military base there. Of course, the US kicked on that particular point. What is your take on this rush for military bases in Africa? Because even Mali is also trying to get help from the Russians.
Yes. You've raised several issues. And before our viewers jump to a conclusion that African leaders are to blame for the predicament in which they now find themselves, don't forget what we had said on this program, not once, not twice, but several times, that on the eve of independence, through clandestine activities, through assassination, through whatever it is, the departing colonial authorities ensured that the leaders, the African leaders who took over power from them, were not what I would call the nationalist leaders. the nationalist leaders who actually fought for independence, they made sure that they were not allowed to inherit the power. Don't let anybody tell you. Don't let anybody mislead you. Don't let anybody misinform you that, oh, the African leaders who came in were the leaders that Africans voted for. Nothing could be further from the truth. The real autochthonous African leaders, nationalist African leaders, they made sure they killed them off. And those they didn't kill off, who then somehow managed to get to power, as soon as they started setting their nationalist inclinations, they carried out coups against them. The first coup in Africa, south of the Sahara, was against Sylvanus Olympio in Togo. And that was done by the French forces, or because he wanted a Togolese currency rather than the French imposed currency that was linked to the currency in Paris. He wanted to abrogate the so-called colonial pact, whereby African countries were asked to deposit their reserves, their foreign exchange reserves, in French bank, and they were only allowed access to, I think, 1/4 of those reserves. He wanted all that changed. They engineered the coup against him, led by a Yadema, who was a sergeant in the French colonial forces. I could draw attention to Nkrumah. We now know that the Ghanaian military leaders who carried out the coup against Nkrumah were actually engineered by the British and the American CIA. So we ended up with leaders who had learned their lesson, that if they wanted to stay in power, they better play the game of the departed colonial authorities who never really departed. Therefore, Africa then found itself in a situation where, one, its economic and natural resources continued to be at the disposal of the departed Western countries. Two, its strategic and military status was controlled by the departed colonial authorities. As the balance of power has now started to change, the Chinese and the Russians are now saying, well, we also want a piece of the African pie, economically and militarily, because they have found out that it is actually through military control that the West controlled the government of Africa and indirectly controlled the economic resources of Africa. So now here comes in the Chinese and here comes in the Russians. And they were not going to make the mistake of just going in for exploitation of economic resources in Africa. They also wanted military bases to protect their economic activities in Africa. I am so pained by the specific example of the Chinese that you have raised in Equatorial Guinea, because it brings to my mind one of the issues which I had tried to address as far back as 1976, when, as Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, I proposed that there should be a South Atlantic Treaty Organization led by Nigeria, Brazil, and Angola. I posited that there was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, there was the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, but that the South Atlantic was still Virgin Ocean, where there was no presence of any of the superpowers. At that time, my aim was to prevent the Americans and the Russians coming into this South Atlantic. I thought if these three countries could spearhead the formation of a South Atlantic Treaty Organization, they could offer a guarantee to the Americans and the Russians that it will be neutral. They won't allow anybody to come in to establish a presence against the interests of the other. You know, it was the so-called Nigerian socialists who took me to the cleaners. They practically asked for my head because they said Nigeria was a tool of the Americans and the British. Brazil was a tool of the Americans, and that therefore I was proposing an organization and a system that will nip the independence of Angola in the bud, that I wanted to derail Angola independence. It had just become independence at that time. Forgetting that the role Nigeria played in securing Angola independence against the Portuguese. I mean, I was an insider, but they came after me. And Obasanjo, in fact, I almost lost my job as DG of NI. It was because, and one can say the truth now, it was because T.Y. Danjuma, who was the Chief of Army Staff of Nigeria, and M.D. Yusuf, who was the Inspector General of Police of Nigeria, two key pillars of that regime, saw sense in what I was speaking. And they protected me. But Obasanjo was the head of state. The whole idea was buried. Now see the position where we are now. The Americans have established an American base in this same area. The Chinese have now come to Equatorial Guinea, where they intend to establish a mighty military naval base. Now, this is a slap in the face for Nigeria. Because, I mean, any plane taking off from that naval base in Equatorial Guinea, within 10 minutes, it is over Nigerian territory. It will be over Nigerian territorial waters. It will be over Nigerian exclusive economic zone. Believe me, what the Chinese are planning to do in Equatorial Guinea is more a threat to Nigerian sovereignty and Nigerian existential presence than a threat to the Americans. It is a pity.
But, sir, how does Nigeria respond to this, given, I presume, that China did not require Nigeria's approval to put that military base there? How should Equatorial Guinea respond? How should Nigeria respond?
I am shocked. I'm no longer an insider. I'm retired now. I am shocked that Equatorial Guinea will do this. I am shocked that Nigeria will allow Equatorial Guinea to do this. And I'm also shocked that the United States will allow Equatorial Guinea to do this, because this is a major disruption to the strategic balance in the whole of that area. It should not be allowed to stand. And I think that China should be asked to make a choice between establishing that naval base there and continuing involvement in Nigerian economic sphere. It should be asked to make whatever it is going to cost us economically. China should be asked to make a choice.
All right, sir. Sir, there's a question or a comment here on YouTube that I think would be good for you to respond to. It says 1884 Scramble for Africa is being replayed in this 21st century. The authentic African leadership should by now have found and realized their dreamed status. Do you agree with the sentiments shared by this comment, sir? And secondly, again and again, when these sorts of issues come up, we tend to refer to leadership and how we're giving away so much. How come we always continue to give away so much in Africa?
The whoever sent in that comment is not following my trend of thought. Where are the authentic African leaders? Are they alive? Are they allowed to come in to take part in the march? Look at the history of coups in Africa. In Nigeria, how many leaders have we had assassinated or overthrown in Nigeria? In fact, the narrative that I was making about the South Atlantic Treaty Organization, which I didn't finish, was that if Murtala Mohammed has not been killed, he would have signed on to that proposal, the South Atlantic Treaty Organization. He would have signed on to it because it would have been a spin-off of his speech at the Organization of African Unity Summit, Africa has come of age. If Africa has come of age, this is something that you should do to demonstrate it. What, 6 weeks after I gave that speech, was assassinated on the streets of Lagos. So they've been killed off. Yes, among the younger ones, they are coming up, but who controls the armed forces of Africa? Because at the end of the day, it is the armed forces. It is the armed forces. The closest that Africa got to in reforming and decolonizing its armed forces was in Ghana when Jerry Rawlings took over and shook that armed forces to its foundation. That was the closest an African country got to decolonizing. And of course, he did it by executing practically all the previous military heads of states. So, when the questioner asks, where are the authentic African leaders? Well, they have never been allowed to emerge. They have not been. There was a second leg to your question, but I don't remember that.
I will come back to that in a minute, sir. But there's another point here. South Africa similarly attempted to establish a military base in Equatorial Guinea during the anti-apartheid struggle. Is every effort at having a base in Equatorial Guinea not targeted at Nigeria?
Of course, most certainly. In a way, you see, I'm one of those who had put out this explanation as to why Nigeria remains in a state of disorganization, which is that no power in the world wants the emergence of a black power in the world, whether it is Nigeria or anywhere else. They don't, because if a black power emerges in the world, they are scared that there will be a countback to the evil of slavery. That's number one. Number two, that all blacks all over the world who are minorities will get their psychological energy back from the emergence of this black power. Recall what Nelson Mandela himself said, that until Nigeria gets its act together and emerges as a world power, there's no black man anywhere in the world who is going to confidently find his status, his position in the world. He didn't say his own country, South Africa, because he knows that it is only Nigeria that has the status in terms of population, in terms of population, in terms of the economic resources, and in terms of the, I don't know what language to use. Everywhere in the world, even as we are now, people regard Nigerians as the most difficult people to confront. It's obvious. Wherever you find a Nigerian, you better don't mess with him, even though he's not backed by any superpower. But it's so obvious that in our DNA, the Nigerian DNA, is located the DNA of a black superpower. And the Chinese have also just told you now, by what they are planning to do, that they are not going to be different from Western powers in terms of wanting to control this black superpower from fulfilling its destiny. They've just shown their hand. Yes. Because I don't know what they need Equatorial Guinea for. They have a military, a naval base already in Djibouti, in East Africa. I mean, would they allow that? The United States, is supporting Taiwan, and China is ready to go to war to get Taiwan back. And then you come to the lips of the largest black African country, and you want to establish a naval base there. Shocking, isn't it?
Yes, sir. The second part of the question that I posed earlier was, sir, you talked about authentic leadership there, and that a lot of the authentic people have been killed. But, sir, when I pick a country like Nigeria, we have so many eminent scholars. Even if we just picked the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs alone, and we look at the number of scholars that have gone through that place and many other organizations, surely we should be able to produce the leaders that would fit the mold of authentic leaders that you've discussed. Why is it so difficult for us?
I managed to become foreign minister. Why did I not survive as foreign minister? I only lasted 2 years plus, simply because I was too nationalistic for the United States and Great Britain. And they needed to get rid of me. And they succeeded in getting rid of me because, as President Babangida had himself said in an interview that he gave, well, the military stability became involved in the question of whether I stay or I leave. You see, the problem with scholars in the third world is that most of them get themselves caught in this trap of the intellectual syndrome of the universe. It's either, at that time, you were either a socialist or you were, I suppose you would say capitalist oriented or free market oriented. And that to them was the dichotomy. But there was another middle ground, and that was to be a nationalist, a national scholar, and have nothing to do with the dichotomies of socialism versus free market. But a lot of our scholars got caught in that trap until today. And part of it, of course, is because that is really where resources for scholarship come from. A lot of our NGOs are funded from foreign sources. I'm aware of that. I remember even at the Institute, the Scandinavians bring in money to fund disarmament studies. And I pointed out to them that you are bringing money to fund disarmament studies in Nigeria, and yet the state of your own military preparedness in Norway, in Sweden, in what have you, is by far more than that of Nigeria. So why do you want to fund disarmament studies in Nigeria? But well, either because they needed it, there are a lot of our scholars who would then accept that money and do the studies to show that Africa needs to disarm, whether they believe in that or not. So it still happens today. In a way, you could say it's a sign of, I won't say economic poverty, because the whole amount of money that Nigerian NGOs get from foreign sources, the budget of one local government in Lagos will fund all those NGOs. But then that is not where the priority of the government itself is. And so, social activists, scholars, and what have you, then turn their attention to where those funds are readily available, or forgetting that they are asked to prepare their budgets in alignment with what the yes.
Sir, I want to also raise a point here on this leadership issue for Africa and these authentic leaders. Because let me go to South Africa and look at the case of former President Zuma. He went to court, he was released on medical parole at the time, and now a high court has ruled that it was unlawful for him to have been let off on medical parole, and they're expecting him to be returned to jail. Should we be treating our leaders like this? And where do you draw the line between justice being served and looking at our leaders and dealing with our leaders appropriately? What is your take on the situation in South Africa, sir?
Well, the latest judgment by the court was based on the grounds that the head of the prison services, which they call correctional services, took that decision to release Zuma, on medical grounds without reference to the parole board, and that therefore due process was not followed. And to that extent, you have to be careful, because the whole idea of having a process, of having a board, is actually to insulate the decision from, if you like, personal prejudices. And in this case, only one man took that decision without reference to the board. Number two, honestly, I'm not sure I really know where I stand anymore on this issue of how to treat our leaders. Because a month ago or so, the former immediate French president was found guilty of corruption by a court and was sentenced uh, to serve his term of imprisonment under house arrest in his house. We find ours guilty and we send them to jail. Which one should we sign on to? I don't. I used to be very, very categorical about this, but there must be. You see, on one let me play that on one hand and on the other hand things. On one hand, African leaders have behaved appallingly. That there is this school of thought that the only way you can elevate governance in Africa is by ensuring that they behave decently. On the other hand, now we're starting to say that if world leaders were to be judged not only by what they've done in their own countries and they continue to do. I mean, if you look at the January 6th invasion of the American capital, but by what they do in the other parts of the world, people ignore it. People turn a blind eye to the use of drones to kill people all around the world. They turn a blind eye to overthrowing of governments in other parts of the world, to assassinating. I mean, we're not talking about something that happened in the 60s. We're talking about what they did in Syria, what they did in Libya, only how many years ago? That's what we're talking about. And yet, they go scot-free. So really, the concept of justice seems to be, it's no longer blind. It seems to be operating with one eye this way, one eye that way, depending on who is perpetrating what offense. Having said that, I'm glad you raised the question of Zuma, because behind what is going on in South Africa, according to Zuma, was that the whole negotiations that went on to replace the apartheid government with a government of the ANC included corruption. One of the leaders of ANC, who were then co-opted into the white economic system, and those that they feel will not accept that, like Chris Hani, was assassinated, Steve Biko was killed, and that people like him, who also fought in the struggle, were not taken care of. that they are not taken care of. And that is why when he then became president of South Africa, he took steps to now take care of himself. So there we go again, back to authentic African leaders, how they managed to subvert them, and the consequences for even a country like South Africa.
Thank you for that, sir. There is a point that has been raised on YouTube here that I'm going to put to you, and then we'll talk about the Turkish African Summit that is taking place. Another relationship that we're starting to see blossom in Africa. But there's a question here on YouTube, a comment really, saying that some African leaders need to be treated as deterrents for not being accountable to the needs of the people they serve. African people continue to suffer. The continent is suffering from brain drain. So that's someone just sharing a view there about their take on the African situation. But, sir, let us look at Turkey Africa relationship. Turkey is now hosting a summit of African leaders. And this is from the one they had done earlier, I think it was in October, they did this summit. And now they're talking about another summit. And from the news that I'm getting, leaders from 39 countries, including 13 presidents, are meant to be attending that summit. We've seen Turkey trying to sell a lot of arms to Africa, and their president has been quite open about building this relationship also from a military perspective. So, what is your take on Turkey and Africa, Russia and Africa, China and Africa, and military presence? Who should Africa be partnering with in all these options that are available?
Well, looks like it, wasn't there somebody who made reference to the Berlin Conference of 1884 or thereabout?
Yes, sir.
Uh,
1884. Yes.
uh, Now, Africa is funny how one could still refer to a continent so ravaged as a new bride on the block. But obviously, I mean, it's understandable for strategic scholars. Africa still has so much natural resources, and the rest of the world haven't exploited and diminished their own resources. That they've gone back to a new form of Berlin Conference, that irrespective of how ravaged, how exploited Africa had been in the past 150 years or so, there is still so much. There was a quote. It wasn't meant as a joke. It was as like, put on your thinking cap. You see, Africa is so poor. Well, if Africa is so poor, why are all of you rushing to go there? Nobody rushes to go to a poor place. You are all rushing to go there because Africa is so rich. But you want to ensure that you get your own paws or fangs or whatever you may say on. You want to ensure that you are not left out again in the new exploitation of Africa. So that's why they are now back, new ones coming in. Be careful how you underestimate Turkey. People seem to forget that 1914 thereabouts, the major powers, empires in the world were the British Empire, the French Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, which we now call Turkey. It was one of the major world, Turkey was one of the major world empires. 1914. How many centuries ago was that? And it was the bad call made by the head, by the king of Turkey in joining the Germans to fight against the British and the French, that actually led to the decimation of the Ottoman Empire. So I see in what the president of Turkey is doing, actually is trying to claw back into the world system, the empire of Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, or the Turkish Empire. He's trying to say, listen, I was once old. We made a mistake, but we are now in a position. If I play the cards well, we are in a position to have a renaissance of that Ottoman Empire. And that's what he's doing. And the place where he wants to play his game, actually he's playing it all over the world. But Africa, again, is still there. So huge that not just one European country can have a monopoly. There are segments of the African cake that Turkey feels it will use to create its own empire, just as France uses Africa to sustain its status as a world power. A French president, it was Mitterrand, who said, without Africa, France would just be a middle European country. That was said by a French president. And that lesson is not lost on the Turkish president.
Sir, there's another point on YouTube here that I want to bring to your attention. But I'm going to combine two really big issues. And I hope I don't massacre them. But this person is saying, is this the preparation for another scramble for Africa by these countries trying to outbeat each other? How should we react to this second coming. I want to expand that a little bit, sir, by looking at the relationship that's building between the US, between China and Russia from a military cooperation perspective. Just recently, the two premiers in those countries met and they said they were going to work together from a military perspective. My question is this, sir. If we were going to compare and contrast, Russia and China are building, they are setting up their own sort of military alliances. What sort of alliance should other African countries be setting up in case we have to defend ourselves against an invasion from all these parties? What is your take on these two sides of the coin? It's going to take us past 8 o'clock, but sir, I'm sure our viewers will want to listen to that.
Well, you are right, or the gentleman or lady who sent in that question is right, that there is a new scramble for Africa. It's evident. How can we, like in a game of chess, how can we checkmate this new scramble? I think it has been the tragedy of Africa that authentic, focused leadership had not been in the right places. They have been, if you like, in the wrong countries. You've got the authentic leader in Rwanda. What's and all, I admit there are problems there, but we are focusing on rescue of Africa. Fortunately, Rawlings was in Ghana, and each time an authentic leader has tried to surface in Nigeria that has the capability to play this role that your questioner is talking about, who could checkmate the exploitation and rescue Africa. Each time he has tried to surface in Nigeria, they have ensured that he doesn't surface. This is not a lesson or a lecture on Nigeria, so I won't go into the details of the leadership in Nigeria that if they had surfaced, they could have not only rescued Nigeria, but by rescuing Nigeria, they could have rescued Africa. The issue you then raised about, on one hand, we are back to two hands. On one hand, the Russians and the Chinese. On the other hand, the Americans and the British playing their concert of democracy. Neither is going to serve African interests. Neither. However, we are not in a position to checkmate them. What we can hope for is that the competition the competition between these two camps will become so fierce that they will get bogged down and perhaps take their eyes off Africa. And, by the grace of God, some authentic African leader or African leaders will slip through. And while those two camps are busy somewhere else, we will then manage to create an Africa that can take care of itself. So at the end of the day, I just have to sound less a professor, but more somebody who believes in the intervention of God.
Yes, just like during the F1 last Sunday, there was a miraculous intervention, the hand of God.
Exactly. Wasn't there somebody also who scored a goal in a World Cup that the referee did not see? Hand of God.
Hand of God. So Africa could be looking for a hand of God, yeah.
We pray so. And let us hope we are not asleep when that hand shows up.
Yes, sir. One last question on these meetings between Russia and China, Russia and the United States. There was an interesting contrast that I saw there, and I want to get your view on it. When we saw President Putin, he was in the room, the TV was there. He sat in a convincing and commanding way. But then when you look at President Biden, on the other hand, he had a lot of people surrounding him, beside him, on the table with him, I should say. What do you have to say about the optics of that, sir?
Well, recall that the optics we saw was from Russian television. I don't know why the United States allowed Russia the control of what was beamed to the rest of the world. And obviously, the Russians wanted the world to see the image of a leader in total control who understood what was going on, who didn't need to be propped up. But so to the Russian people and to the rest of the world, the image they wanted us to see was what we saw. A Putin in total control of the environment. While, as you rightly said, the image that they showed us of Biden, but which, in fact, is there anybody in the world who doesn't know that Biden needs to be propped up by his advisors, whether it is in the things he reads out, whether it is in the press conference, whom he calls upon. It's so, he calls on somebody from New York Times, and he looks to his left while the gentleman is on the right. And it's so obvious. It could be better done, but it's an old man. And perhaps one should grant him that. Anybody but Trump. I think that is the definition of Biden. Anybody but Trump. But to want to compare and contrast Biden with Putin, no. You'll be making a mistake there.
On that note, we'll end the program this evening. I know we should have taken the question on Summit for Democracy. We will deal with that next week. because I think that might be a wider topic for us to address. So we'll deal with that next week. But once again, thank you to our viewers. Thank you for the questions online. Fortunately, this year, as we approach the Christmas break, I think we still do have Thursdays that don't fall on any of the holidays. So we will advise what will happen, but I expect that we would still be here on the Thursdays that we have. But we will advise accordingly on those ones. Once again, thank you so much, Prof, for being here this evening. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye, sir. Bye-bye to our viewers as well.
Bye. No.